Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a closer look at a question that's kind of lingered in pop culture for a while. What exactly happened to Paula Abdul's career back in the 90s? And there's this really powerful but also pretty mysterious story she tells to explain it.
Right. Paula Abdul, everyone knows her, yeah. Choreographer, huge pop star, forever your girl, opposites attract.
Totally iconic. Her career was like stratospheric in the early 90s. Then it seemed to, fade a bit.
Before she came back strong on American Idol. Yeah.
Exactly. And the reason she gave for that time away, it's this really harrowing story about surviving a plane crash, a devastating one.
It is quite a narrative she presents, and she shared it, very consistently, very detailed, across some big interviews.
Oh, yeah. Like where?
Well, RuPaul's show, Larry King Live, that's in Union Society, places like that.
Yeah.
But the striking thing is, there's basically no official record.
No record.
Or even like contemporary news reports from the time that back it up.
Yeah. Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive then. We're going to unpack Paula's story, her really vivid account of this supposed 1992 plane crash.
Right.
And then the crucial part, compare it against, official stuff, public accounts.
Explore the inconsistencies, the questions. It really is an enigma.
Totally. We've been digging through interview transcripts, articles from places like Jezebel, People, VH1, Investigation Discovery, too, trying to piece this puzzle together.
So where should we start? Her account.
Let's lay out her story first, the narrative she consistently tells.
Okay. So she describes being on tour, right? The Under My Spell tour. Sometimes she calls it Spellbound. This is 1992. She's on a private jet, a 7-seater, flying from St. Louis to Denver. And she says about, 30 to 40 minutes into the flight,
boom,
engine on the right wing blows up, catches fire, and the plane starts, plummeting.
Wow. Okay. And the impact itself sounds just terrifying from her description.
Absolutely. She says she wasn't wearing her seatbelt at that moment. Or maybe she says she broke through it. Anyway, she hits her head hard on the plane's ceiling.
And gets knocked out.
Knocked unconscious, yeah. Then she wakes up in a hospital. And that's when she learns she's crushed her cervical spine.
Crushed her spine. That sounds incredibly serious.
It led to partial paralysis on her right side, she says. And she claims she needed, get this, 15 cervical spinal surgeries.
15? That's staggering. Although, haven't the numbers sometimes varied a bit?
They have, yeah. Sometimes she says 12, sometimes 14, but always a very high number.
Okay.
And she's also talked about nerve damage, spinal cord damage, this sort of constant bone-on-bone pain in her neck from it.
Just awful. But she also mentioned something miraculous, doesn't she, about the others on board?
Right. She says miraculously nobody died out of the 7 people on the plane.
No fatalities in a crash like that?
Apparently not. She says others had minor injuries, stitches, gashes. Her hair and makeup artist, Daniel, was supposedly there.
And she even credits someone famous with the rescue.
Merv Griffin's crew, yeah. Says they rescued them from a cornfield where the plane ended up.
A cornfield. Okay. So these severe injuries, this is her explanation for vanishing.
Pretty much. She says it forced her to take a break. Sometimes she says 5.5 years, sometimes 6.5, sometimes 7 years off from her career.
Because she was afraid of being seen differently.
Exactly. Afraid of being perceived as, quote, damaged goods, which, in her telling, explains why she was out of the spotlight until American Idol started in 2002.
Okay, so that's the story she tells. Powerful stuff.
Very powerful. But here's where it gets complicated. The twist, you could say.
Which is?
The most striking thing about this whole story. The complete lack, total absence of any contemporary news reports.
They're from 1992.
Exactly. No media coverage of a major superstar being in a serious plane crash back then. We've looked, search Nexus Archives, Google Books, nothing.
Nothing at all. For a star that big, that seems odd.
It's very odd. And it's not just the news.
What else?
The official databases. The National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, they log all U.S. aviation accidents.
And?
There is no record, zero, of any crash matching Paula Abdul's description around those dates or locations.
Hold on. A private jet crashes, catches fire, people are injured, a huge celebrity is involved, and the NTSB has no record.
None that matches her story. Think about that. Even in the early 90s, before, the internet was everywhere, an event involving a star of her magnitude, a fiery crash.
Yeah.
It's really hard to imagine it going completely unreported and uninvestigated officially.
Yeah, that definitely raises some flags.
It's a critical point. An NTSB investigation, especially with injuries or significant damage, would usually be public record. Their database having nothing is, well, it's a major question mark.
And you said the first time she even mentioned it publicly was much later.
Way later. The earliest we can find is 2003, on Dateline. That's more than 10 years after it supposedly happened.
Wow, a decade of silence. That does seem suspicious, maybe. Or is that too strong a word?
It certainly adds to the mystery. You could argue, maybe, that a star could try to keep something quiet back then, especially if she really wanted to avoid that damaged goods label.
Right, before TMZ and everything.
Exactly. But are there issues within her own telling, beyond just the lack of outside proof?
Ah, okay. So inconsistencies in the narrative itself.
Yes, quite a few, actually.
Yeah.
Let's talk about dates and timing.
Okay.
So we know she performed in St. Louis. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch confirms it. June 19th, 1992. Her 30th birthday, actually.
Okay. St. Louis, June 19th. And the flight was to Denver, right? She had a show there.
Scheduled for June 22nd, yeah. So that flight path makes sense initially. St. Louis to Denver. But then, an Entertainment Weekly article mentions a show she did in Bonner Springs, Kansas, on June 20th.
June 20th. So the day after St. Louis, but before Denver. Where's Bonner Springs relative to that?
Well, it complicates that direct St. Louis-Denver flight path idea, doesn't it? If she was in Kansas on the 20th.
Right. Okay. What else?
The timing within the flight. She consistently says the engine blew, like 30, 35, 40 minutes in. That part's pretty steady.
What?
But she's also sometimes stated the crash happened when she was 27.
But you just said her 30th birthday was June 19th, 1992.
Exactly. So if the crash was in 92, she was 30. If maybe she meant 91 during the tour, she would have been turning 29, not 27. The age just doesn't line up.
Okay, so dates, age. What about the location, the cornfield?
Ah, yes, the landing spot. She consistently says they crash-landed in a cornfield in Iowa.
Iowa. And the flight was St. Louis to Denver. How does Iowa fit in?
Doesn't really. Geographically, Iowa's way north, like roughly 200 miles north of a direct flight path between St. Louis and Denver.
200 miles. That's not a small detour.
Not at all. A typical flight path wouldn't take you anywhere near Iowa on that route. A St. Louis to Denver flight is usually about 2 hours, 15 minutes. Going via Iowa makes no sense.
So it's not just like a minor detail she's misremembering. It's a major geographic inconsistency.
It feels that way, yeah. It really challenges the plausibility of the event, as she describes it, if the basic geography is that far off.
It makes you question the whole foundation of the story.
Precisely. It kind of moves beyond, oh, she got a detail wrong, towards, is this account fundamentally reconcilable with reality?
And what about her disappearance timeline? You said she claims 7 years off.
Or 5.5, or 6.5, depending on the telling.
Right.
But here's the thing. Sources show she actually resumed her tour, the Under My Spell tour, after the alleged crash day. It wrapped up in August 1992.
So she didn't stop performing immediately.
Doesn't seem like it. And then she released another album, Head Over Heels. That came out in 1995.
1995. So only 3 years after the supposed crash.
Right. Now, that album, Head Over Heels, it didn't do very well commercially. It kind of flopped. And it seems like her more significant withdrawal from the public eye actually happened after that album's poor performance, not immediately following the alleged 1992 crash.
Okay, so the timeline she presents for her absence doesn't quite match her documented career activities.
It seems more complex than a single event causing a 7-year immediate stop, based on the records.
So how does Paula explain keeping such a massive event secret, given all these questions?
Well, her main rationale is the era. She says, there was no computer, there were no paparazzi back then, not like today.
Implying it was easier to keep things quiet.
Yes. She claims she just quietly made it go away. She's mentioned having people sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements.
Plausible? Maybe.
And her motivation, she says, was not wanting people to feel sorry for me or to count me out as damaged goods. She wanted to control the narrative.
Okay, I can understand that motivation. But could you really keep a plane crash with multiple people involved quiet with NDAs?
That's the big question, isn't it? Interviewers like Larry King specifically told her they'd never heard about it, which seemed to surprise him.
And what about the officials? NTSB, FAA.
An NTSB spokesperson basically said it would be unlikely for something like that to go undocumented. Unless, maybe, it was never reported and they never found the wreckage, which also seems unlikely for a plane crash.
But could there be a loophole?
Well, an FAA spokesperson did suggest something interesting. They said it could potentially be classified as a minor incident rather than an accident if maybe the damage and injuries were actually minimal.
And incidents don't always require a full investigation.
Right. That's one possibility, perhaps, if the reality was much less severe than the story told later.
Okay. And what theories are out there in the public? Why might the story be different from reality?
Well, you hear speculation. Was it maybe fabricated or perhaps embellished to explain her career slowing down after the 90s peak?
Or maybe related to other things going on?
Possibly. There were rumors about painkiller addiction, which, it's crucial to note, she has always vehemently denied. She attributes any perceived loopiness, especially on Idol, to medication making her feel off, not addiction.
Well-
And she did go through a lot personally around that mid-90s time too, right? The album flop, 2 divorces between 94 and 98. Maybe the story became a simpler way to explain a complex period.
It's all speculation, of course.
Purely speculation.
Right.
But there's another piece here that isn't speculation at all, and it's really important.
Which is...
For chronic pain. It's absolutely real and incredibly well documented.
Right. This isn't something she just started talking about recently.
Not at all. While the crash story itself is disputed, her battle with severe chronic pain is undeniable. And it actually started way before 1992.
From cheerleading and other things.
Yeah, cheerleading accidents when she was younger, car crashes. She had a history of physical injuries contributing to ongoing pain issues long before the alleged plane incident.
So the pain is real, regardless of the plane crash story.
Absolutely. And then there was a significant diagnosis later on.
You mean the RSD?
Exactly.
Hmm.
In 2004, she was diagnosed with reflex sympathetic dystrophy, RSD. It's a neuropathic disorder, causes intense chronic pain.
And she's linked that to how she sometimes seemed on American Idol.
Yes. She said the RSD explains any loopy behavior people observed. She attributed it directly to the intense pain and related sleep deprivation, not drugs or alcohol.
That diagnosis puts a lot of her struggles into context, doesn't it?
It really does. And think about her medical journey overall. Those 15 or 12 or 14 surgeries she talks about on her cervical spine. She's also described damage to her vocal cords from intubation during surgery, apparently leading to a 2-year period where she barely had a speaking voice.
Wow, I didn't know about the vocal cord issue.
Yeah, and she explored alternative treatments too, like Chinese medicine, trying to manage everything.
It just shows incredible resilience, doesn't it? To keep going through all that.
Absolutely. Battling that level of excruciating pain, especially through her whole first run on American Idol. Apparently she lost a significant amount of weight then too, just due to the health struggles.
And she's been very clear about her sobriety.
Very clear. She's quoted as saying, "I'm a girl that has never used drugs, I've never been addicted, I've never even been drunk in my life." Her ability to push through pain, whatever its primary cause is, well, it's remarkable. Testament to her spirit.
So wrapping this up, what's the big takeaway here after digging into Paula Abdul's story?
For me, it's this fascinating clash, isn't it, between this incredibly detailed personal narrative of trauma and survival and the complete, utter silence from official records and contemporary reports. It really makes you think about how stories get told, especially by public figures.
And maybe why they get told that way. What purpose the narrative serves, perhaps beyond just literal fact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it also throws her resilience into sharp relief. Regardless of the specifics of the plane crash story, her journey navigating chronic pain, multiple surgeries, and the pressures of fame, that part is undeniably real and compelling.
It really is. It leaves you with a question, doesn't it? If you are famous, dealing with intense private struggles, chronic pain, how would you tell your story? And what does it mean for us, the audience, when that line between a person's lived experience, their pain, and the specific narrative they choose to share becomes, well, so blurry?